Additionally, if the shares are verbal, how can we improve that? Looking at the verbal part now, I have prepared 3 types. The first is, in DI, it's more on the side of, for the verbal team, what does it mean when it's purely text and more verbal? That's TPA, right? There are 2 columns, the first column and the second column, and they share one set of options. Then you're asked to pick one option to fill in column 1 and another option to fill in column 2. We'll put the question in and use a basic approach first. If you want the explanation to be a bit softer, then just use language that a high school student can understand to explain the steps and answer to this question in detail. Think about it super fast. If you let him do it, maybe he could finish class early and go out for a smoke or something. So you'll see that he'll go through the question with you step by step, explaining what information each sentence contains. Next, he'll explain to you how he reasons through the problem. After that, he'll tell you which option to choose, and then we'll check whether his choice is correct. Looking at the first option, it says that among those phones that only have touch functionality, less than half have fewer than 2 accessories. Now, if you look here, hasn't he also perfectly predicted 2 answers? But sometimes you might say, Dusty, when I look at his explanation, some parts are a bit disjointed. For example, let me give you an example. Look, at the beginning here, it first talks about 4 pieces of information given in the article, which are quite scattered. For instance, it first says that among all the phones being sold, most of them, if you have a contract or are renewing your contract, most of them are discounted, right? Then it says that this store sells more of the traditional phones, the ones with keypads. Next, if it's a phone with a keypad, most of them are under 8 inches, no, under 8 centimeters per step. And then most of them come with more than 2 accessories. If it's a touchscreen phone, most of them are over 8 centimeters. And again, most come with more than 2 accessories. You might say, Dusting, after I see this information, what comes next? He suddenly jumps straight to the answer about which information to use. But this isn't how I think during exams it feels like the answer just appeared out of nowhere without showing me the reasoning process in between and just went straight to the answer. I didn't really understand after reading this. So what can we do at this point? You can treat the problem-solving process that Dusty, like a tutor, taught you as an instruction and tell him, please show me the steps one by one. All right, so you see, the principle here is a bit different. This part supplements the methods used by humans. For example, the way I teach in class is, first, don't read the passage right away, start by reading the question to find the key point being asked. Second, then tell me what's in the passage. Which pieces of information in the passage are relevant to the question and which are irrelevant? Because in my reading comprehension classes, I talk about how to distinguish between relevant and irrelevant information. The biggest feature of DI is that it actually contains a lot of unnecessary text. It looks like there's a lot there. It seems like there's a lot of information and a lot of charts, but in reality, most of the data won't actually be used. So you need to learn how to distinguish between relevant and irrelevant information and then come to class. I've mentioned that I hope students can practice this in advance either by using the process of elimination to answer questions, or even more importantly, by understanding that as humans, we don't process all the information together at once. That's how AI does it. However, as humans, we don't just bundle everything together and think all at once. Instead, we proceed step by step using clues from the previous step to figure out what we need to look for next, and we think in a linear fashion. So when I incorporate my problem-solving methods and processes into the class and combine them with the way humans naturally think, the solutions we arrive at become much easier for us to understand and apply. For example, first, we identify the key point, which is to compare quantities or proportion. After identifying this, the key point is that it's less than half. So at this point, there's a lot of information in the passage. For example, words like more can be ignored because more just means a comparison of more or less, but it doesn't necessarily mean more than half or less than half. Only the parts with most need our attention. Next, we distinguish between relevant and irrelevant information. As mentioned earlier, terms like more or less can be disregarded. Our focus should be on who is mentioned as having the most or the least. Next, you can use the relevant information you've filtered out to make logical deductions and arrive at possible answers. And finally, determine the correct answer. Of course, if you feel that any of the steps in between are going too quickly, you can pause them directly. Then you can copy it into the next conversation and ask, for example, can you tell me the detailed step-by-step reasoning here? And it will still help you explain. In other words, don't just feel dissatisfied with the answer. You can always ask for a more detailed explanation at any point. Of course, if you're one of my middle school students, you can always reach out to me for support. I'll provide direct help, and I guarantee my answers will be even better than AI's. But here that is what Austin always advocates, is that if you can study on your own, you should do so. So today I'm telling you everything without holding back, even though it might seem like I'm introducing you to a business from another country. What I really hope is that you can quickly overcome your difficulties. So if you can solve problem independently, that's even better. As you can see here, I'm also using the same method I just mentioned. If you are the person creating the question, what specific concepts and key points do you mainly want to test in the exam? You see, it also helps you filter them out, right? Information screening and judgment, orientation, qualitative and quantitative comparison and inference, group classification and comparison skills. It helps you sort these out clearly. You can even ask it to help you design a question. You can have it create a similar question for you to answer. Actually, there seems to be a bit of an issue with this design. Why? Because in the process of designing this, you see, normally the characteristic of TPA is that there are 2 blanks. That's correct. But the 2 options for these blanks are supposed to be shared. That is, both the left and right side should be chosen from the same pool of options. In this case, it's obvious that there are two different pools, so you can just tell it to redesign this question. Why? Because when you have two blanks to fill, they should share the same set of options. Then it will help you redesign it. What is a more advanced usage? A more effective method, everyone, is what we call the Terminator approach. Actually, there has always been a special way to break through called camping review. That means for the types of questions you're weaker at. I hope you can turn on a recorder. You don't wait till you finish to do this. You start recording as you work through the problem, using the problem-solving process you learned in class. Record how you think through each step, what your thought process is at every stage. It's basically like talking to yourself, but imagine you're explaining to someone else how you would approach each step. You have to treat yourself as if you're the teacher giving a lesson. Explain by using Dustin's method, how would you do this step, how would you do that step, record it as audio. Then after you've recorded it, compare it with Dustin's problem-solving videos in the Terminator series. This way, you can immediately and clearly see why each step is right or wrong. Hey, okay, this is our unique way of practicing problems as an intermediary. It's just like if you want to be a pitcher. You start out as a complete beginner. So first, you have to learn the proper pitching form. Once you've learned the pitching form, you also need to record yourself pitching. Then you compare your slow motion footage with that of world-class pitchers. Only then will you realize, for example, that your hand position isn't correct here, or your waist is rotating too fast or too slow there. You need to imitate and compare yourself with others in order to gradually correct your own issues. So in the Terminator method, there's an approach where you first record your own audio. After recording, you compare it with my standard video as a reference, so you can immediately identify and correct your own problems. Now, if you're not an intermediate student, what can you do? Let me explain this first. If you're doing practice questions and recording your answers, what can you do? You can use your phone or any device to record your voice, then upload your recorded file into this program. On a Mac, it's called Mac Whisper. And on Windows, it's actually called Whisper Desktop, okay? So Whisper Desktop is a software application from OpenAI, the well-known, widely recognized, and influential AI research organization based in San Francisco, which is the creator of ChatGPT, the popular chatbot. They created a tool that can model television voice. And this model supports most of the world's languages. For example, if I upload my answer process into it, what will it do? Let me show you. It will immediately recognize every sentence I say while solving the problem. See, this is exactly what I just demonstrated. I recorded myself. For this problem, I'm now going to solve it. But according to the problem-solving process, I first look at the question. Then, what is the content I interpret from this question, right? Next, after reading the question, what's the next step? Look, the next step, what is the second piece of information? What is the third piece of information? After reading, I think about what I should do. Based on the information in the passage, I think it could be this or that. So I decide what to choose on the left and what to choose on the right. Basically, I'm verbalizing every step of my thought process as I solve the problem. So you might ask, why does Dustin want you to speak it out loud? Actually, the teacher says it's because normally you would write it out like this. But writing is really too slow and will eat into your time for solving problems. You only have so much time to practice, so I'd rather you speak it out. Look, after I finished speaking, it took me just over 3 minutes. And the speech recognition was really fast. It took only about half a minute to recognize everything. In just half a minute, it's all converted. So after it's converted, what do we do next? After the speech recognition is done, I take the entire process of how I solved the problem, the text that was just recognized, and put all of it into this model. Then ask it the following. Here is my spoken problem-solving process. Please point out any mistakes I made while solving this problem, as well as areas that could be improved. See, it will automatically help you analyze which parts you need to pay attention to, where you made mistakes in your parameter judgments, where you should have used threshold inversion but didn't, and where you were influenced by distracting information in the passage. Which parts of your logic are off to the side, and how can you improve them? So you can see this directly relates to what we just talked about, the second layer of problem-solving methods, where we can clearly identify which abilities we are lacking in our own problem-solving process. We can also clearly identify which step in our problem-solving process was wrong, instead of just looking at the same detailed solution as everyone else. However, after you read the solution, you might only understand this particular problem, but you still don't know which part of your original thinking was incorrect. In the past, this was very difficult to achieve, but now we can all use AI to do it. If today's problem is a logic question, can we also use the instructions we just mentioned? If it's a logic question, you see, you can also tell it to use them. Use an explanation in a tone that high school students can understand, not just give the answer. You can see here that it first understands the argument, identifies possible counter-arguments that could weaken it, and then evaluates each option to see if it helps us assess the strength of the reasoning. And then you can even add the problem-solving methods we use in class. For example, the approach we teach is to first read the question, identify the key point for solving the problem, then tell me which information in the passage is relevant, and finally tell me your initial thoughts before going through the options one by one. You see, it will help you go through each step, doing it well, explaining and making judgments step by step. If you have a different problem-solving process, you can also adjust it with a different approach. For example, in class, I've talked about another problem-solving method called self-questioning and self-answering. And another method is to put yourself in the shoes of the person involved. In the story, the main character is a child on a farm. Because they are often exposed to microorganisms from farm animals, they are less likely to develop allergies. This in turn hints at the final conclusion, which is being exposed to microorganisms in childhood helps strengthen the immune system. The method we teach in class is to put yourself in the shoes of the person in the article. So the approach we discuss in class is to imagine yourself as a child on the farm and think, I didn't develop allergies when I grew up. Could it be because I was often exposed to microorganisms as a child? Is it possible that as a child, I was also exposed to other things? Or maybe I actually took other medications, or perhaps I just have better genes. In class, we always talk about this kind of immersive thinking, putting yourself in the situation of the person involved. Makes it easier to consider possible counter-arguments or conclusions within the logic. Starting from GPT-1, this kind of steady and conventional approach that matches our usual problem-solving methods would tell everyone, if you use my way of solving problems today, can you demonstrate it for me? Put me in the shoes of a child who grew up on a farm. Moreover, the way I usually do it is through a self-questioning and self-answering dialogue. You see, it can directly simulate this. Okay, let's look at the information mentioned in the article. Then, should I say that as a child like me, because I'm often exposed to living things, I'm less likely to develop allergies? Now, the question is asking me how I should evaluate this. And then I first ask myself, what is the core of this question? The core is whether it's really because I'm exposed to microorganisms and not due to other factors. Then I ask, how should I evaluate this factor? I need to find out if there are any confounding variables. All right, so you can see that we can take our own habits or the problem-solving process that teachers teach in class, turn them into instructions, and it will follow this process to demonstrate the main approach for you. Next, let's look at the RC section. You can also ask it to help you organize the specific logical concepts tested by this question, or help you with other aspects related to the debate topic. You can even go further. You can also take the CRTs from the foundation or other CRTs you've done before and ask it to help you categorize them. For example, which questions have concepts most similar to this one? This is totally fine as well. Now, let's continue. What if it's an RC question? For RC, the general instructions are basically the same. I'll share those instructions with everyone in a bit, so don't worry. For example, you can ask it to explain the steps and answer to this question in a way that a high school student can understand, and it will give you a very clear and steady explanation. However, you can also apply the problem-solving SOP and thought process that your teacher usually teaches in class. You can incorporate that as well. For example, when I teach, I always say that the first thing is not to look at the questions right away. So when you're just reading the passage, you should first identify the key points of the article. All right, so please help me with this. If I don't know what questions will be asked, can you tell me which parts of an article are the key points? And then next, you read the questions and then tell me which keywords and key points in each question should be connected to which paragraphs. Let me know that as well. After reading the paragraphs, I still want you to go back and if you're answering, tell me how you use the relevant information from the article to arrive at an answer. Also, you need to match my way of thinking, which is a linear logic. If you look at it, it should be able to do this well. However, sometimes you'll find that its answers are not quite satisfactory. For example, like in this part, when we want to see more information, the first step is to look at the article and extract the key information from it. But as you can see, what it wrote is very vague. It just says to understand the author's main arguments, the structure of the argument, and to mark key data. What it wrote is very vague. This could be because we're asking it to do too many things at once. As I mentioned earlier, if you ask it to do a lot of tasks at the same time, it will write each one in a very simplified way. We just mentioned this point, if you cram all the instructions together, each step might end up being very simplified. But sometimes we really do want to see the details. So what should we do? In situations like this, what we need to do is ask again, I really want to see how you analyze the article. Please explain the first step in more detail. You can see that at this point, it will focus on explaining the first step, what exactly we need to do in our overall reading approach, and then what the main point of each paragraph will be. What is the main point of the second paragraph? What might be the main point of the third paragraph? How can you take notes? Then you can compare the notes or key points you originally made to see if they match. My suggestion is this. Don't just ask them to do it. Remember the most crucial idea we just talked about, which is that they are not the ones actually taking the exam. So when you're working on the questions yourself, you should organize your own notes first. After you finish organizing, then compare them with theirs. This way, your own skills will improve more because they will never take the exam for you, no matter how good they are. Once you completed the first step, you can then ask them to demonstrate steps 2, 3, 4, and 5 for each question. They will help you identify the keywords in the question first. They will tell us which paragraphs in the passage are connected to the keywords, then explain which method is most suitable for this particular question, and finally show us how to evaluate the answer choices. Of course, if there's any step you don't understand, you can ask them to give a more detailed explanation of problem at all. This is what we just saw, and it should be an RC question. Sometimes you might say, Dusty, when I was reviewing, I noticed in class, it was mentioned that logical flow and logical interpretation. What exactly does that mean? How do I compare my logic map with the actual logic to see if they're the same, right? I can't just say I finished it without making a comparison. You can also ask them to draw a structure diagram based on the article itself. You'll see that they will directly create a diagram for you based on the article. In the structure diagram, the first paragraph talks about improvements in the industry environment, mentioning 3 approaches: the old method, the good method, and the new method. Then relating it to the viewpoints within the company, it further draws an analogy to the entire quality revolution or methods, old perspectives, new perspectives, and the defects that pollute quality. After you review this, you can compare it yourself, and you can even take the logical diagram you created, put it in and tell them, please help me compare and point out where my understanding is incorrect. If there are areas where my understanding is wrong, please help me find the relevant passages in the article. Then help me explain what exactly I misunderstood. You see, this way, you're not just staying on the surface, but actually tracing back to the root cause behind it, right? You can't just stop at realizing you misunderstood something and think you're done after comparing, because if you stop there, what does that mean? It means you're only staying at the level of understanding this particular question. You haven't actually identified your own problem. Maybe your issue is that you don't understand a certain word in a sentence, then you need to pick out that word and learn it, right? Or maybe your problem isn't with the vocabulary, but rather that you misread the sentence structure. In that case, you need to single out that sentence and study its structure to understand exactly where the key point lies. So what's truly important isn't just spotting the problem, but digging into the root cause behind it. So if I were you, I would say, okay, I'll give them my logic diagram. Ask them to help me make a comparison. And after comparing, tell me which part doesn't seem quite right. Ask them to point out exactly which sentence in the article I misunderstood. Then after I truly understand it, I'll naturally know which words in that sentence I don't understand or which grammar points I got wrong. Because the story won't carry over to the next question, but the vocabulary or sentence structures you don't understand will still show up in the next question. So our review principle is to always think ahead to the next question and not get stuck on the current one. That's for the verbal section.